Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic Shahada channel. Venezuela, a nation once celebrated for its immense oil wealth and promise. Today, it stands as a country caught in one of the longest and most devastating economic collapses in modern history. The year is 2025, and the crisis has reached a new intensity. Hyperinflation continues to erode the value of everyday life, the national currency struggles for survival, and entire communities face shortages of food, medicine, electricity, and basic necessities. Streets once buzzing with commerce are now marked by uncertainty, lines, and empty storefronts. Families count not just the hours of darkness during power cuts, but the rising cost of simply staying alive. And over all this looms a powerful geopolitical force. The United States has tightened its sanctions once again, especially targeting Venezuela's crucial oil sector. The cancellation of foreign oil licenses, financial restrictions, and pressure on global trade routes have pushed the country even further into economic isolation. Every sanction ripples through the economy, deepening inflation, shrinking jobs, and closing the door on recovery. To many Venezuelans, the crisis feels like a suffocating storm with no clear end in sight. Yet, behind these overwhelming headlines, behind the stories of collapse, of sanctions, of political tension, there is another story rarely told. A story of a small, quiet, and incredibly resilient minority, the Muslim community of Venezuela. Representing less than half of 1% of the population, they are often invisible in global narratives, but they too stand on the front lines of this economic and political unraveling. Their mosques, their families, their businesses, and their very cultural identity are being tested every single day. So the question emerges, how does a tiny religious minority survive within a nation battling one of the world's most severe crises? How do they preserve faith, culture, dignity, and community while navigating shortages, sanctions, and social instability? And what does their experience tell us about resilience, identity, and the human spirit in times of profound hardship? This is the story of Islam in Venezuela in 2025. A story of endurance, adaptation, and hope against the odds. To understand the challenges faced by Muslims in Venezuela today, we first have to look back, far before the years of sanctions, shortages, and political paralysis. The story of Islam in Venezuela did not emerge suddenly in the era of crisis. It began more than a century ago, woven quietly into the nation's cultural and commercial fabric. In the early to mid-20th century, waves of immigrants from Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and Turkey began crossing the Atlantic in search of new opportunities. Many were escaping economic hardship, conflict, or political instability in the Middle East. Others simply wanted a place where they could build a future for their families. Venezuela at that time was a country on the rise, buoyed by an oil boom that promised prosperity and stability. It became a natural destination for merchants, craftsmen, and ambitious young families looking for a better life. These early Muslim immigrants brought with them not only their languages, traditions, and faith, but also a strong business ethic. They quickly became known for their entrepreneurial spirit, opening textile shops, electronics stores, import businesses, and small family enterprises. Over time, their presence shaped the commercial identity of urban centers across the country. Most of the community concentrated in a few key cities: Caracas, the bustling capital where diversity has always found a place; Maracaibo, the oil hub of the West; Valencia, one of the nation's major industrial centers; and Punto Fijo, home to the massive Paraguana refinery complex. In each of these cities, Muslim families laid down roots, established businesses, and built the foundation of what would become Venezuela's modern Islamic community. What defined this community for many years was its peaceful and deeply integrated character. Muslims in Venezuela were not isolated, they were part of the national mosaic. They lived alongside Christian and Jewish families, participated in civic life, contributed to the economy, and raised their children in a society that, despite its flaws, offered space for cultural coexistence. Many Venezuelans came to know their Muslim neighbors not through politics or conflict, but through the warmth of local shops, the hospitality of family restaurants, and the everyday interactions of ordinary life. This was the foundation, stable, rooted, and hopeful. A community built quietly over generations. A community that had, for decades, enjoyed a sense of belonging and steady growth. But as Venezuela entered its era of economic freefall, political turmoil, and escalating U.S. pressure, this once stable reality would be challenged in ways the early immigrants could never have imagined. By 2025, Venezuela has become a stark example of what happens when economic collapse, political struggle, and international pressure collide. The crisis, once described as temporary, has now stretched into its second decade, reshaping nearly every aspect of Venezuelan life. The year opened with inflation surging once again, rising above 150 to 200%, a staggering figure that erodes household savings almost as soon as money enters a family's hands. The bolívar, once a proud symbol of national identity, continues its freefall in value, forcing citizens across the country to rely heavily on the US dollar for everyday transactions. To understand the Muslim experience in Venezuela today, we must first understand who they are, where they come from, what binds them together, and how they have adapted their identity to one of the most challenging environments in the Western Hemisphere. In 2025, the Muslim population of Venezuela remains small in number, but rich in diversity, history, and internal cohesion. Most Venezuelan Muslims trace their roots to the Middle East, particularly Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria. Their first ancestors arrived more than a century ago, but their cultural legacy remains strong. Even generations later, many families maintain a sense of connection to the lands of their grandparents through cuisine, language, and religious tradition. They are merchants, professionals, teachers, business owners, and community leaders. For many, Venezuela is home, but the stories passed down from parents and grandparents carry echoes of diaspora, perseverance, and the search for stability. But the Muslim presence in Venezuela is not limited to those of Arab descent. Over the past few decades, a growing number of Venezuelans, including indigenous and Afro-Venezuelan individuals, have embraced Islam. Many cite spiritual curiosity, intermarriage, community support, or the moral clarity of the faith as reasons for their conversion. These new Muslims have added a vibrant and distinctly Venezuelan dimension to the community, blending the rhythms of local culture with the principles of Islamic belief. Their presence is a reminder that Islam in Venezuela is not static. It continues to evolve, adapt, and expand despite national hardship. The heart of the Muslim community beats strongest in its mosques and Islamic centers. The Sheikh Ibrahim, Al-Ibrahim Mosque in Caracas remains the most prominent, not only in Venezuela, but in all of Latin America. With its towering minaret and vast prayer halls, it stands as both a spiritual sanctuary and a cultural anchor. Here, families gather for Friday prayers. Children learn Arabic and Quranic recitation, and community leaders organize programs to support those facing the harsh realities of the crisis. Even as electricity flickers and the cost of living soars, the mosque continues to operate, sometimes relying on generators, sometimes adjusting schedules around power outages, but always keeping its doors open. Far to the northwest, in the city of Punto Fijo, another major mosque plays a crucial role for Muslims in the Paraguaná Peninsula. Surrounded by the massive refinery complex that once fueled Venezuela's economic ascent, the Punto Fijo Mosque serves as a spiritual refuge in a region deeply affected by industrial decline. Despite shortages and economic strain, The mosque continues to hold community iftars during Ramadan, youth circles, and educational sessions that reinforce Islamic identity in uncertain times. And across the country, smaller Islamic centers, from Maracaibo to Valencia, provide their own humble but essential services. These centers often double as schools, food distribution points, and cultural hubs, especially during major religious seasons. In recent years, many Islamic organizations have intensified charitable efforts, distributing food packages, coordinating medical aid, and offering support to families hit hardest by inflation and unemployment. Even with limited resources, the commitment to charity, zakat, and sadaqah has only grown stronger during the national crisis. What stands out most in 2025 is the community structure, small in population yet remarkably organized and unified. Leadership within the Muslim community tends to be collaborative, with imams, business owners, elders, and youth representatives working together to address needs. This unity is not merely administrative, it is a survival mechanism. In a country where institutions struggle to function, the self-organization of minority groups becomes essential. For Venezuelan Muslims, that structure has helped preserve religious life, cultural identity, and social support during years of national hardship. Despite living within a collapsing economy, despite shortages of fuel, medicine, and basic goods, the mosques remain active. Friday prayers still fill the halls, Ramadan nights still echo with recitation, communal meals, and late-night prayers. Marriages, funerals, celebrations, and acts of charity continue with quiet determination. In a nation marked by instability, the Muslim community stands as one of the most tightly knit and resilient minorities, maintaining faith, preserving tradition, and supporting one another in a landscape defined by uncertainty. For Muslims living in Venezuela in 2025, faith is not simply a spiritual identity. It has become a source of resilience in the face of profound daily hardship. The country's economic collapse touches every family, every institution, and every corner of life. But for a religious minority with specific dietary needs, communal obligations, and ritual practices, the crisis introduces additional layers of complexity that shape everyday survival. One of the most visible challenges lies in accessing halal food, especially halal meat. With supply chains broken, transportation unreliable, and livestock production shrinking across the country, what used to be a routine purchase has become a weekly struggle. Importing halal-certified meat from abroad is nearly impossible, as international trade routes remain restricted by sanctions and high transportation costs. Local butchers capable of providing halal slaughter face obstacles ranging from fuel shortages to unstable electricity. As a result, many Muslim families ration their protein intake or rely on community-organized distributions, where meat is shared collectively to ensure that no household goes without. Food inflation adds another layer of pressure. Sudden price spikes, sometimes doubling within a matter of weeks, disrupt not only family budgets, but also the operations of religious institutions, Islamic schools, weekend madrasas, and small community kitchens that once provided meals to children and low-income families now struggle to keep their doors open. Ingredients once taken for granted, rice, cooking oil, flour, sugar, become luxuries, forcing community leaders to constantly adjust menus, reduce portions, or seek donations from wealthier members of the congregation. The economic reality has transformed even the simplest act of feeding students or preparing a communal iftar during Ramadan into an exercise in endurance and resourcefulness. The national electricity crisis reaches into the spiritual heart of Muslim life as well. Daily blackouts disrupt prayer schedules, cut off air conditioning or fans in mosques during hot seasons, and sometimes force religious gatherings to be postponed or moved outdoors. Evening programs, Quran study circles, youth lessons, Ramadan Taraweeh prayers often depend on the unpredictable availability of power. In some mosques, generators serve as desperate lifelines, humming through the night to keep lights on or power a single loudspeaker. In others, worshippers pray by candlelight, continuing traditions passed down through generations. Despite the darkness that surrounds them, security concerns have also become a constant part of daily life. As the economy collapses, petty theft, street robbery, and break-ins have increased across urban centers. Muslim business owners, many of whom operate small shops, often find themselves vulnerable, closing early or reinforcing their storefronts with metal shutters. Community centers must pay for additional security or rely on volunteers to safeguard mosques during events. Families traveling to Friday prayer groups sometimes coordinate in small caravans, hoping safety in numbers will deter opportunistic crime. Yet amid this harsh reality, the community responds with remarkable solidarity. Community funds, built from zakat, sadaqah, and small donations collected during Friday prayers, are used strategically to support the poorest Muslim families. Groceries are purchased in bulk and distributed quietly to widows, single mothers, elderly congregants, and unemployed youth. Some mosques maintain emergency funds to help families cover rent, medical bills, or school fees. Others organize donor networks, connecting wealthier business owners with Muslims who have lost their livelihoods. In a country where the state struggles to provide basic assistance, the community itself becomes the safety net. Even the country's rapid dollarization has shaped religious institutions in unexpected ways. As the believer loses its value, mosques increasingly operate using US dollars for maintenance, salaries, and charitable projects. Donation boxes must accept multiple currencies. Quran teachers and security guards are often paid partially in dollars to protect them from inflation. This dual currency reality forces imams and administrators who once focused primarily on spiritual leadership to become managers, accountants, and crisis navigators, balancing faith obligations with financial survival. Despite all these challenges, shortages, blackouts, inflation, insecurity, the essence of Muslim life in Venezuela remains intact. Prayers continue, mosques remain open, charity flows, families gather for iftar. Faith becomes not just a belief system, but a form of resistance against despair. In a nation struggling to rise from prolonged crisis, the daily choices of Venezuela's Muslim community reflect a profound and enduring truth: that faith, when tested, can become an anchor strong enough to withstand even the harshest storm. One of the most painful consequences of Venezuela's national collapse has been the steady outflow of its people, and the Muslim community is no exception. What was once a vibrant, multi-generational minority with deep roots in commerce and community life has, over the past decade, begun to shrink. The exodus is not sudden or dramatic. It is a slow, continuous departure, like sand slipping through fingers. Families leave quietly, one by one, carried by necessity rather than choice. Many of the destinations reflect familiar paths in the broader Venezuelan migration crisis. Colombia and Brazil, as neighboring countries, have become the first points of refuge. Entire Muslim families cross borders by road or on foot, seeking stability, access to health care, and opportunities that no longer exist at home. Others travel farther, to Chile, a country that once offered economic openness, to the United States, where established Arab diasporas sometimes absorb new arrivals, and to Spain, where language familiarity and historical ties provide a softer landing. For some, these moves are meant to be temporary. For many others, they become permanent chapters of a life rebuilt from scratch. This outward movement has created an ebb and flow dynamic within Venezuela's Muslim community. When the crisis appears to ease, a few families return, hoping to restart businesses or reunite with relatives who remained. But when the crisis deepens, the tide reverses, and more families depart once again. The overall trend, however, remains unmistakable. The population is shrinking. And with every departure, a small piece of the community's capacity is lost. The mosques and Islamic centers feel this impact most intensely. The same institutions that once thrived with volunteers, teachers, organizers, and youth leaders now struggle to maintain programs. Quran teachers migrate in search of stable income. Youth mentors leave to find work abroad. Elderly community members remain, but the younger generation, those who would have become the next wave of leaders, are increasingly absent. Friday prayers still gather congregants, but the once bustling hallways of weekend classes echo with fewer footsteps. Rooms that once held lively Arabic lessons or children studying Islamic history now sit partially empty, symbols of a community stretched thin. Islamic education has suffered deeply. With fewer teachers, fewer stable resources, and fewer students, programs must adapt or be suspended entirely. Parents worry that their children will lose connection to their faith, especially as daily survival overshadows religious learning. Some families resort to online classes, connecting with teachers abroad. Others rely solely on home instruction. And for those who leave the country, the challenge becomes integrating into new Muslim communities while navigating unfamiliar cultures and languages. Whether they stay or leave, the younger generation faces a disrupted religious upbringing shaped by the tremors of Venezuela's prolonged crisis. But perhaps the most profound loss is economic. For decades, Muslim-owned businesses formed the backbone of the community. Textile shops, electronics stores, import companies, restaurants, small factories. These enterprises not only supported individual families, but also contributed to the community's internal stability. They funded mosques, sponsored events, offered employment, and provided charity. As business owners migrate, these networks vanish. Shops close, commercial ties dissolve, and the economic ecosystem that once sustained the community becomes fragmented. The remaining families lose not just their neighbors, but their mentors, employers, partners, and sources of shared resilience. The Muslim exodus from Venezuela is a quiet tragedy, less visible than the empty shelves or the blackouts that dominate headlines, yet deeply felt within the community's core. It is the story of families torn between loyalty to the land that raised them and the undeniable need to survive. It is a story of heritage carried across borders, of mosques holding on with fewer hands, and of a minority trying to preserve its identity as members scatter across continents. In the end, migration becomes not just an escape, but a reflection of the profound transformation of a community once firmly rooted in Venezuelan soil. As Venezuela moves deeper into 2025, the future of its Muslim community hangs in a delicate balance, shaped by forces far larger than itself. The country stands at a crossroads, and so do the families who gather inside its mosques, run its businesses, and hold on to traditions passed down through generations. Their path forward is defined by two competing scenarios, two possible futures that reflect the broader, unpredictable fate of Venezuela itself. In the first scenario, the crisis simply continues. Inflation remains uncontrollable, sanctions stay in place, and economic paralysis pushes more families to pack their bags and start over somewhere else. Every departure chips away at the community's foundation. Fewer worshipers, fewer teachers, fewer young people enrolled in weekend classes, and fewer businesses capable of supporting charitable programs. Under this trajectory, the Muslim presence in Venezuela does not disappear overnight. It slowly thins out, year after year, until only fragmented clusters remain. Elders fear that without a critical mass, Islamic education, family traditions, and communal life will become increasingly difficult to sustain. But there is another possibility. A quieter, more hopeful scenario built on gradual diplomatic shifts already emerging in 2025. Should sanctions ease or new regional agreements take shape, Venezuela could enter a cautious reconstruction phase. In that context, The existing mosques and Islamic centers, already accustomed to acting as mutual aid hubs during the worst years, could evolve into broader community anchors. These spaces may take on roles that are social, educational, and humanitarian, extending help not only to Muslims, but to all neighbors in need. After years of hardship, people know they cannot rely solely on the state. They rely on each other. And this could transform mosques into essential pillars of rebuilding efforts. At the heart of this question lies something deeper: identity. With so many young Muslims born into crisis, preserving culture and faith becomes both a challenge and a mission. Parents and local leaders emphasize Arabic classes, Quran study, and programs that strengthen a sense of belonging. These efforts matter more than ever because they safeguard something that could easily fade in a shrinking community: memory, continuity, and pride in who they are. Increasingly, it is the youth, fluent in both Venezuelan life and global digital culture, who are emerging as the key holders of the community's future. Their choices will determine whether Islam in Venezuela remains a faint echo or rises as a renewed and resilient presence. So the outlook for 2025 and beyond is neither purely bleak nor blindly optimistic. It is a story still unfolding. A story of a minority community navigating uncertainty with determination. A story of survival, yes, but also the potential for renewal. If circumstances shift and if its younger generation decides to stay, rebuild, and carry their heritage forward. In the end, the fate of Muslims in Venezuela will not be written solely by economics or geopolitics. It will be written by the people themselves, one family, one mosque, and one generation at a time. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.